Okay, everybody, welcome. It is August 15th and about an hour before stand-up, which is when we love to get together, maybe have a cup of coffee and talk to all of you. It's the Dev Talk Show and my co-host, Rich Ross. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well, Chris. Good to be back on the show again this morning. So,
Yeah.
we've been chatting a good bit around what we might talk about. So this we got some good things lined up.
Yeah, and it's been a really, at least for me, I'm just checking to make sure it looks like everything's good. We actually seem to be live on a couple channels, which is great.
Nice.
So again, we're on YouTube and Twitch. So if you're watching us right now on YouTube, just to let you know, we're also on twitch.com, The Dev Talk Show, and it's youtube.com/The Dev Talk Show will get you here. Where you can watch us live, and every show recording ends up. In fact, right now it's being saved to YouTube.com/The Dev Talk Show. So make sure you ask questions in the comments, subscribe, talk to us right now in the Twitch comments or the YouTube comments. We'd love to hear from you. So it's been really exciting what's going on, I think, with the last, at least according to the blog post from the ASP.NET team, the last .NET 8 preview, which was preview 7, came out on the 8th, and apparently after this we go to release candidates.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we're a couple of months away from November, and which is likely going to be when GA hits, and you usually get a couple of release candidates, which is good because oftentimes they come with a go live license, so you can actually use that to roll into production, which is kind of where you want to be anyway at some point. So
yeah, right. So let me see if I can get my screen going here while we're chatting. And you mentioned November, and that's great because as we know, in November let's see, there we go, shift across to the right for our branding there. .NET Conf 2023 is going to be November 14th through 16th. And I think, as we know, the last several .NETs have been released in November. I don't think it's a secret that the .NET team wants to release here. But the point is it's coming out this fall. So
nice.
This was a blog post we looked at last time. At least I'm pretty sure we looked at it. It was from Rich Lander, August 8th, saying that .NET 8 Preview 7 is available. And it said, and he just says in the first sentence, the final preview release for .NET 8 and will now shift to release candidates. So that's pretty cool. And if you were here last time, then you knew that kind of like an episode of This Old House, I think, which maybe dates me a little bit. Because I don't know if anybody watching today would maybe know what This Old House is.
I think it's still around, or
I think so too.
In more recent versions, but
it doesn't let me go to the devtalkshow.com. So let me see. I think my solution last time was to try a different browser, which yeah, he probably wants to go out with you, so you can take him. So as people who watch the show also know that in the mornings my dog gets so confused about life and everything, and then mainly it's because it's still summer break around here.
Sure.
So he's like, wait, there's people outside, and then he's like, oh, but there's people in here too. So here we are at the Dev Talk Show website, which was built with ASP.NET MVC, and not necessarily that it needed any MVC features. Frankly, I think you could make the argument that it could have easily been just a static HTML page. But it needs to be rebuilt, right? It needs to be redone. And one of our first problems is that we haven't renewed the certificate in a little while, which was part of something that I was hoping we could talk about as well. So a lot of interesting things to do, and among them is, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up off stream just to make sure that I'm not showing anything sensitive in the Azure portal. But this is one thing I wanted to ask you about, is what you like to do to handle things like this. those first time setup items, and this goes for a lot of things, but the web, one of those places, the stuff you set and forget. And then when it comes time to remember how to do it, you have no idea.
So when you say set and forget, that could be a couple. So are we talking configuration stuff? Are we talking build stuff?
It could be, for example, I have a process I use now to renew these certificates.
Okay.
I will say that at least what's nice is that I've got it down to a PowerShell script that I can run without remembering what goes into the PowerShell script. And I even wrote myself a little README to say, okay, it's been 90 days.
Right.
Here's the stuff you need. Here are the secrets you need. But more than that, this site auto deploys. Meaning that I am using, let me see what I can show here from it. There is, let's see, here we are on the Azure portal. This is the web app for our site. You can tell because it says production on it. So clearly it must be the site. And it turns out that it actually is.
Right.
And there is a deployment center. Deployment center is where we can figure out, like, where is this coming from? And it turns out the source is Azure repos. And remember last time I was trying to find it in GitHub?
Yeah.
Well, and it's problem number one is I was looking in GitHub and not in our Azure repos project, which is an internal project. It's not the github.com site, which is github.com/TheDevTalkShow, is our organization. We post public repos there. And this one was kept private. I don't think there was any specific reason. Maybe we just wanted to use Azure repos that day. I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, typically in Azure DevOps, it defaults to private. So think of the classic way Azure DevOps rolled out. It was mainly used by enterprise people. So they wanted to keep those repositories within the boundary of their enterprise environment. So that's, if nothing changed, that's why it was probably done as a private repo.
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, I think I really do believe that for a lot of this, we either built it on the show or and said, like, well, let's try something different. Because, I mean, if you're familiar with this, that's how it's going to go. So it was just that last episode, we were here trying to find the site looking all up and down GitHub. It's like, well, there's... got our first problem.
That's kind of where we are now. Yeah.
So if I head out to it, which I think is going to come up just fine, just by looking at it, you can see that it is a model view controller based. And look, .NET SDK 3.1. We can look at the global JSON. So it's been a while. If we're talking 3.1, we haven't touched this in quite some time. I mean,
yeah. I mean, it was probably in that first year we went and did that.
Yeah, we were probably still doing the live shows after Philly.net. So that's okay. One thing that's kind of interesting, and maybe this is great for people who haven't seen this before, is Let's Encrypt. There is a project, and here's the bad thing is I'm not going to remember where I got this. I feel kind of, maybe we'll be able to figure it out. There was a project out on GitHub that gave you everything you needed to use Let's Encrypt, whether you were ASP.NET hosted in IIS or ASP.NET Core. And there's a slight difference for your .NET Framework sites, which was still very relevant when we built this. Yeah. You use a ASP.NET, you use a hosting module, an IIS hosting module. And what's neat about the IIS pipeline is you could drop this hosting module in, and the way Let's Encrypt works is it just uses a challenge response kind of system that essentially you're proving to it that you're not just asking it for a certificate for a site that you can't possibly own. So, through a series of challenges, it figures out, okay, you seem to really know the DNS, and you also seem to really be in control of the website. So I'm going to believe you and issue a certificate for that site at that DNS. great for ASP.NET and for IIS hosting, and doesn't work for .NET Core because .NET Core has multiple places you can host it. You don't have to be on IIS.
Yeah, that hosting pipeline doesn't exist there, or
Yeah,
may
yeah.
not
I mean, you
exist there.
can. Yeah,
Right.
you can host on IIS. There is the ASP.NET Core IIS hosting module. You're perfectly fine to host there, but you might be hosting on Kestrel.
Mm-hmm.
You might be, so with the other options, there needed to be a different way. And so there was this code that I found online that basically said, here's what you do. You add a class to your project. And then I do think you have to, maybe you don't. I thought you had to, yeah, you do. You do have to go ahead and add it to your pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even change the name of the class. It was called the Acme Challenge Responder. And I said, sounds good to me.
That'll work.
And it's essentially I don't think there's no secrets in here. But essentially what this does is it goes out to create some places for when Let's Encrypt challenges. It could go store that data somewhere because it's going to need it for a future response. And it basically sits there listening for Let's Encrypt challenging and saying, yes, I'm really the website. And oh, by the way, yes, this is the content you're looking for. And therefore, what happens is if you have this in place, then the PowerShell script I was talking about, you can fire that script off, which tells Let's Encrypt, go do the thing. Let's Encrypt fires here, and it becomes very automatic. We probably could look at setting this up from scratch when we rebuild the site so that way it's not just me hand waving like, oh, look, all you need is this code.
Yeah.
We could set up the code.
Yeah.
I'm trying to look and see. I don't remember the details though. So, and I don't accidentally want to like open one of these app settings JSON files and it's like, there it is. That's the secret. So I don't think that's how it works though. So yeah, another feature of this site was custom domains,
Mm-hmm.
which is these 4 domains that are bound to the site.
Yeah.
Azure Web Apps is telling me they're expired. There are several ways to do this. I can do this all manually in the portal. I can bring the certificate here and I can upload it here. And I actually did that when I got started because I didn't have any kind of automation. When you're building out, your deploy for this, whether it's GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps pipelines, do you think it's valuable to even have this? So somebody's at the door. So now, do you think it's valuable to have this first time setup in your automation somehow, just so that you're not like me looking at it so many years later going, I don't remember how to do this?
I definitely think so because I think, well, so 2 things. One, first off, yes, I think that's good to have because I think that makes it easy for you, at some point later on, say, well, I had a pipeline that got my code once I checked it in and everything was fine to move it to Azure or whatever service we're using over there. So I'm pretty confident that can work. So I definitely think having that at the time you're thinking through those makes sense. I think what we've got here, though, is basically using some of the capabilities inside of Azure itself to point to that repository and say, I know where the code lives. And whenever I get something that says, hey, I've got a check-in, I can pull that code across. So I'm pretty sure that's how we set that up, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think we can probably even find the pipeline. So
Well, that's what I
here's
mean. There's pipeline. Okay.
Yeah. So, again, now we're going to know February 25th, 2020. Wow.
Yeah.
Reboot the project for .NET Core 3.1. And then, it's been a while since we've looked at this. And I think what we can do is look at the pipeline. And in this particular pipeline, we're installing .NET Core because I think the pipeline needs it to build.
Yep.
Using the CLI to build, we're publishing, and then I'm trying to think of how does this get to the site after this? Do you think this is where it's a little bit of the pipeline's building, but then maybe some of these services are picking it up?
No, let's go back over to Azure
Okay.
DevOps. So
Yeah.
when we wrote this, and it was kind of shifting kind of around this time, you have pipelines and you have releases. So your pipeline is going to do the build, the tests, all your unit tests run, make sure they all pass. And then once those pass, essentially, the idea is that you've set it up to make sure that you're looking at the build pipeline to make sure that none of those things failed when you go to run your release pipeline, or when you go to run a pipeline that moves us back into the main branch of your project, right? There are rules that you can set up to make sure that all the tests pass and those kind of things. So that's why they split it out, because they originally it was kind of two different runs, one to build and test and then one to deploy. They've since made it so that you can build and deploy from just the regular old pipeline, the build, what we used to call the build pipeline. So if you're looking through that, and remember, as you see there at line 5, you're running this on somebody's virtual machine, whether it's a hosted one in Azure or that Microsoft hosts, or it's one of your own. You have to think of what's going on in the steps here from that kind of context. So I'm on that machine. I need to get that code onto that machine. Now, DevOps Pipelines pretty much does that for you. But you do have to, depending on the version of .NET you're using, you may have to install the appropriate version. And that's what those tasks are doing. So once you install it, then you go ahead and run those just like you would if you're doing it locally on your machine. You do the build command, you do a publish command. If you were tested, if you had a test step in there, you would probably do your test after or in between those two. And then the publish bit is that, again, that's on a virtual machine. So we've got to get that published code off of the virtual machine into a package that we can then use as part of our deployment or release pipeline.
Okay. And so it might be sitting in here in releases, which it looks like it kind of is. Right?
Yeah.
And okay.
And just before we move on, everything we kind of walk through there,
Uh-huh.
if you were to start from scratch with a brand new pipeline, you can, now granted, I think, well, let's edit. Yeah, we are using the YAML. Even with the YAML on the assistant side, it'll walk you through and say, well, what kind of project is this? And kind of give you, almost like a quick, templated bunch of steps. So for a .NET Core, here are the things you kind of need to do when you're first running this. Or if it's a Java program, or if it's PHP, right? What are the things I need to do to kind of get those things set up? So you don't have to completely start from scratch, but if you do, and you've done, because you've done this number of times and you know the steps you want, you can certainly go ahead and do those yourself. But
okay, so I see what you're saying is that I think there's two things you're pointing out. One is that this particular pattern, it already jumped out to you as being an older method because this merely built and dropped an artifact, and then I had to come over here to releases and pick, edit this, and it was more of a visual view of deploying to the app service. And that's my impression too, because in 2021, 2022, I did a lot of Azure Pipelines work on the job and did not use this part at all. Everything was happening out of the YAML. And so I think that transition must have happened. And, you're just working. You don't stop and think about like, oh, this is different from how we did it on the show. And so we would, if we were to do this again on Azure Pipelines, the experience would probably be us living in here.
Yeah. And I think part of that is that functionality is definitely there now, as you saw when you did stuff in 2021, 2022. And B, I think many having this as a YAML file instead of having it as the classic editor way of doing pipelines gives you something that you can check into your code base. So that YAML file there exists, and you can see in that folder. But the pipeline that's done via the classic way, or the release pipeline that's done via the classic way that we saw, both of those, they are versioned, but they're not part of your code repository. And I think that's the reason why things have moved in that direction. We want everything to be part of that code base.
Yeah. In fact, I went back to Azure repos, and here's Azure Pipelines YAML. Like, this is it. This is the file. but it doesn't include the release because, again, we did this a while ago. So if we were to do it again, we probably wouldn't spend time in here as much as we would be saying, okay, let's get the YAML right. Not only like all these steps are great, although I'm sure these tasks have changed, and that's okay. We would see where they are today. But when we got to the end here, it looks like there is, like right here it is right now, a deploy to Azure App Service. So, using these, when you don't know how to use these tasks, I think a lot of times it's fair to just start here by clicking and filling this out. And look, there's a lot of things I've got to, and it might just do it. It might say, okay, so I still got a little bit of work to do. I think, oh, actually it is a web app on Linux. So maybe no, I'd have to find it, right?
Have to make sure it's the right subscription, right?
That's true. That's true. Which,
because there were two there.
The other thing about it is I wonder, is this service connection out of date? That might be what it's really complaining about. In fact, I think it is.
Yeah.
The provided client secret keys are expired. So probably what I would do is set up a brand new service connection, because it probably has been a while. So
probably safe to say.
Yeah, create a new app. And then I'd fill the rest of this stuff out. And when you say add, instead of like the old world adding to a visual editor, it would drop it in here in the code, in the text.
Yeah.
And then you would be like, oh, okay, I see how you get started. And and then maybe even jump out to documentation to figure, and then GitHub is saying, I love how GitHub asks me every now and then, like, are you really sure that you know how to do this stuff? So jumps you out to GitHub documentation because it just so happens that the many Azure pipeline tasks are in the Microsoft, not all of them, because it's but many of them are in the Microsoft organization and Azure Pipelines tasks. So here's documentation, so we could learn all about that task.
Yeah.
So the same goes true for GitHub Actions, right? As I think part of what I was thinking is, I think your answer was really that automation makes sense regardless of whether it's first time setup or continuous delivery, but that maybe there isn't a golden hammer in that, I've got to get it in the pipeline. The first time setup's got to be in the pipeline with like if I've done this, then do this. Because that approach doesn't really solve the problem. You want the tool, but you don't necessarily need to say my one true way of setting things up is the pipeline.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you may have, depending on your application and the scope of your application, you may have multiple pipelines. You might have one that just deploys the front end and another one that deploys the back end services and looks at the folders and only runs when things got changed inside of those particular folders, one for the web, one for the API. So there's those, there certainly is the quick way to get started. Like, hey, I'm just going to push this in there because it's dev and I want to make sure it works. And then there is I want to do this so I do get that separation and have that independent deploying capability across my services. So,
okay. Now, I don't know if we'd make this decision today.
Yeah.
They say that good architecture is decisions deferred. I've heard that. I've heard that. And I've heard it from multiple speakers that your architecture is good if you can continue deferring decisions. I think one example of that would be if your code, if you kind of know you have a pretty good interface for something, if maybe you can keep writing the data out to like just a JSON file while you're working, and the interface picks it up just fine, because at least you say to yourself, okay, I haven't chosen whether this is going on SQL Server, is it going on Postgres, is it going in a document DB? I haven't made that choice yet, but I'm still working and moving forward, so therefore maybe I'm on the right path.
That's right.
Are we going to, do you think that part of this, I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Do you think part of this will be a move to GitHub for the repository and GitHub Actions?
It doesn't have to be, right?
Sure.
And this is
that's exactly it.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Right now, Um, Azure DevOps and GitHub are both supported ways of doing continuous integration deployment and repositing your code and all that. And there are features in some that people like and features in others that people like, and there are ways to mix and match, right? So if you wanted to choose, for example, boards, Azure boards, because that does your project management stuff and your Scrum capabilities, and you want to choose GitHub repos because you like the way they do PRs and things of that nature, you can do that and you can connect them all up. The point is, with all of that, is we've got things in Azure. Azure DevOps is serving the purpose for us. There's no reason for us to move off at any point in the foreseeable future. We can keep using it. If we want to get experience around GitHub, because that's kind of, where everything eventually will wind up at some point in time, then it would be an opportunity to move some of the features there. Maybe we move the repo there and we do the actions there, but we keep the boards here, right? Or we just wholesale cut and move over and we start using, because of the size of this project, we use issues and projects up in GitHub. I think those are decisions, as you said, that can be deferred. We don't have to make an overarching choice now. This certainly works fine for us.
Yeah, yeah. And I've seen a lot of that out in just the enterprise, in that I still tend to see enterprises gravitating towards Azure DevOps, because just looking, you could just see it right here on the left side of the screen, that boards, repos, pipelines, boom, 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 they're all right there. They integrate. You can commit something when you're in repos. You're in repos and you go and you create, I mean, I don't have any pull requests to show really here, but you go and create like things like pull requests. Yeah, see, there's no pull requests to look at, and I'm not even sure that there's really, there's not a whole lot, but work items can be, and look, we must have been messing around with this stuff, because here's a work item, a bug. All of that just gets integrated. And then the nice thing is, then you go over to boards and you could put all these work items in here. You can have your burn down charts, or Kanban boards, or everything. And it's not, I believe, sometimes it's hard to keep up because GitHub moves so fast. I believe these features are making their way over, but that tight integration, just, you're just a Microsoft shop, you're heavily invested in Azure Active Directory. It just all works. So,
Yeah.
there's something to that.
So two quick comments, because I know we're trying to keep to the hour, but so there is a SKU for GitHub if you're doing enterprise work, that you can use your Azure Active Directory and your AD counts inside of GitHub, and that's called GitHub Enterprise Managed User. So there is a certain SKU for doing that, and customers love that, because that's how we manage access. They're somebody's at your company, they're part of Azure AD, and when they leave the company, we can pull the access because we pull their account, right? That ecosystem all works very nicely. The other part to what you were talking about with the boards and repos and things getting checked in, you can do that same reference of, hey, I've checked this code in, and I can refer back to AB number and the number of the item, and it'll close out that item if I say close it. Or there are certain actions that happen imply that you want to close it, and GitHub will certainly send that information back down to Azure boards as long as you've got those connected, and it will do those updates for you. So it doesn't completely just because I'm in one system for my planning and another system for my repo, I still have a way of making all that interactive together.
Okay, so you're less, I mean, the connections are growing greater and greater among the different products, where I think maybe if we looked at that several years ago, it might just not have been as fully featured as today. But then again, the nice thing is you really don't have to choose, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's kind of the net.
Yeah, it's kind of the point, right? Is
It's any platform, any programming language, any place to deploy it to. So
all right, so what I'm trying to do is see if I can get my Windows terminal to come up.
Okay.
Oh, there it goes. I had to think for a little bit. All right.
Cool.
So what else are we going to need to do this? One thing we're going to need is .NET. And when you've installed .NET, if you do -- version, it kind of says like, okay, well, here's the latest. I do have preview 7 as noted by the 8.0.100 preview 7. And the question now, though, was I started asking myself some questions about like what are the easiest ways to get .NET? I always get curious time and again because we talked about this is something I think people who watch the show know I'm fascinated with is first time setup. And it's because no one ever on the team ever remembers how you did it. That's problem number one. And then problem number two of N problem, because I imagine there's more than this, is when it comes time to do it again, enough has changed that even if you have this fantastic memory or you wrote it out in a Word doc or a SharePoint page or whatever, that it's changed. And those two things combine to create, for me, tremendous frustration. I get incredibly frustrated when I realize we don't know how to deploy this from scratch. Like if I'm on a team or something and we come as a realization as a team, and this is fictional, I'm not talking about any specific company, but it certainly has happened every place I've worked, is if the business comes to you and says, we'd love to set up another environment, and then that becomes a 90-day exercise for the whole entire organization because they just don't know how to start over. It frustrates me.
Right. And I think there's a difference though between starting over on your machine and starting over in
there is.
in the various environments, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And hopefully what we just walked through with the pipelines or actions will give you that confidence that, hey, you want to spin up a new thing? Well, okay, I just got to get probably a new service connection to where we're pointing to deploy these assets.
Yep. And yes, the same problem exists with how do you start over on your machine, because you get a new developer on the team. How long does it take you before they stop saying like, this isn't quite working right? Or just what happened recently, a seasoned developer on your team comes back to the project after maybe not doing a task in it for 3-4 months because your team might handle multiple projects and they can't get the thing to build and run and work anymore. And it becomes this big huddle of like, now I'm not saying that you can get rid of these problems once and for all. And it's a wonder, but every time I watch these little like scrambles happen. And when they're over, I've come to the point of saying, okay, now how do we remember this? How does this not become the tribal knowledge of, oh, if you run the app and you see this error, then it must mean that you need to go here and add this to your environment variables and then go run npm install. Like how do we prevent that from becoming just tribal oral tradition?
Yeah.
And act on it. And there's no one answer to this. Every time it's a different thing.
Well, yeah. So depending on how you go, there are a couple of ways that I'm thinking that we should at least mention, even though we don't dive into.
Yeah. So the home of .NET is at .NET. And so what I'm going to do real quick is just say like, so I'm brand new to .NET. You're watching this show and you say, I'm brand new to .NET, but you've convinced me. I want to take a look. Where do I go? What I do is I tend to say, well, let me go to the home of .NET at .NET. You can just click download. And then it does figure out that you're on Windows. If you're on Linux, this is going to say for Linux. And on Linux, which we could do I think it'd be a fun show because, I love to play around in Linux, is it'll give you many different options, install through Snap, install through apt maybe, or Yum. And then it'll also be like, look, you want to build the code? You want to build, we got you. On Windows, you tend to see this matrix of options. This is for .NET 7. And if I zoom in on Windows, it'll say, hey, do you want an x64 installer? This is your very traditional like install, and it comes up next, finish.
Yeah.
And then I saw this the other day and said, winget instructions.
Yeah.
I said, oh, that's cool.
That is pretty cool.
So I went out to winget and let me see. I think if I say search and I say .NET, I think we'll see it in this list. I think. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay, so winget.
Yeah, lose the period.
Okay. You might have been right. It might have just been .NET. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
So
there we go.
you were right. So here we go, Microsoft.NET Runtime 8 preview. And it even says like, oh yeah, sure, you can install it through this. And so I could grab just this name, or I could grab this ID and then do a win-get install. And I in fact did that on this machine. So
Awesome.
I thought that was cool. I thought new way to try it. I think that's pretty neat. The other thing that I played around with for a little bit is, if you have been doing .NET for a while, your machine may look like this, where you say, I'm going to run it again. Here's some old out of support and previews and so on. It actually looked worse than this. And so I think we're not going to do it today, but I think there is an opportunity to look at the .NET uninstall tool, which actually helped me clean this up quite a bit. I kind of did that on another machine. On another machine, I had so many previews. And it's the machine I took to Philly.net a lot, so that probably explains it. Like,
yeah.
I'm going to do a talk, so let's look at this preview. And there were so many. And I said, okay, I got to clean up this machine at some point. So I thought that was cool.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So you have all of those, and when you say, hey, tell me what version it is, it came out with, I guess, the latest, which was your preview version there.
Mm-hmm.
What if I don't want to be by default running that latest build? Is there a way to kind of swap that?
Yeah, and I think what's really great here is you are asking me to remember something. I do remember, and I think the way you do it is this. This is a little sad that I'm now trying to remember how to do these things. So, okay, let's see if I've got it. So this shows me the .NET. When I say .NET -- version, you're like, oh, it's on preview. So what you do is, let's say everything in the .NET CLI is run based on the project. Well, in this particular source folder, there's no CS proj, and more importantly, there's no global JSON. So it's just going to go to the latest when I'm running commands, or yeah, running commands isn't a bad way of thinking about it. For example, if I create a new project and I say I want it to be Blazor, I'm going to get the template for the preview. But to your point, what if I want the .NET 6 version? So what you do, let's see if I remember this, is let's go .NET. I'm going to make a directory called .NET 6, and then I'm going to go into it. Okay, so now we're sitting in /source .NET 6, and then you don't have to use the CLI to do this, but just to show you that you can, because here's how people like me forget how to do things, is I can say .NET new. So I'm going to ask .NET new for some help here, because I just want to remember how to do it. It's .NET new, and so I didn't see the list of templates. Okay, so list. So let's look at the templates real quick, which I think is .NET new list. Oops, maybe I should spell it correctly. .NET new list. The one I'm looking for is global JSON.
Okay.
That's the one I want. So that template is either called global JSON with no period or global.json, probably just to make it easy so people like you forget and whatever. We got you. It'll work. So I say .NET new global JSON. I don't have to do anything else. And global JSON file was created.
Okay.
All right. I know this seems a little strange.
Yeah.
Let's check the .NET version.
I'm hanging on.
Let's check the .NET version real quick and see if I'm right. Still 8 preview. Okay. Let's look at that global JSON, and I'm going to be super old-fashioned and do it from the command line. And it's a JSON file that's explicitly putting this preview in. All right. So now here's what we're going to do. We are going to let's open it up in Visual Studio Code. Maybe one of these days we'll use NeoVim for this. But what I want to do is just open up that global JSON, and we are going to change this version. Now, I do recall that you do not have to be precise, because there's rules about how this global JSON resolves itself. So I'm just going to try putting in 6.0. If this doesn't work, we'll go copy a version string exactly. All right. So I have now saved that. And here's the drum roll. If we type, we see it's 6.0. Let's see the .NET version. Okay, so it did complain, but I think we're getting the point. .NET dash dash version, this command could not be loaded because you requested 6.0 and I don't have a 6.0.
Oh, because you didn't do a star or something for your like 6.0
Yeah.
star. Okay.
So let's try that though. And because I have forgotten the rules for this. Maybe it's star, maybe this is good enough. Let's try that. Just 6.0. Don't no more than that.
Okay.
And now version says, oh no, that didn't work. That didn't resolve. So I may have to let's put 203 because I see a 203 out there.
Sure.
And now the version has quote unquote changed to 6.0.203.
Gotcha.
And theoretically, and when I say theoretically, it's because I'm pretty sure about all this, that now if I do a list, we should see some interesting things here. For one thing, I got the welcome message for 60203. So clearly I'm using a different .NET exe.
Right.
It's even saying, oh, I created a new dev certificate for you that you haven't trusted yet. Okay, fine. And because this is the .NET 6 CLI, they have not moved the list command out to be a first-class command yet. It's still a parameter. So it blew up and said, like, no, I can't find you templates. So that may be a trick that a lot of people don't know. If you have the muscle memory of doing this to look at the list of templates,
yeah,
this still works, but it has been deprecated. I just found this out the other day. And so now this works. But in .NET 6, it's like, nah, no, what are you talking about? Because I am using the older version.
Right. Oh,
and so now I could say, okay, I want to create, look, I can't create a Blazor app of the new, we talked about it last time. The new features are all going into a template that's just plain old called Blazor.
Yeah.
So I can't do it because I'm in .NET 6. We don't have that yet. So all it takes to switch versions is to put a global JSON in your folder and go from there. And so for me, the pattern when I have a bunch of these on a machine and I'm doing it from the command line, if you're a Visual Studio user, you just get like this all just happens.
Right.
But if you aren't, or maybe you're on Linux, or maybe you just want to build it from the ground up, which sometimes I will do, not because I want, so badly to control everything. You just kind of want to see how everything works.
Mm-hmm.
The pattern is first create a global JSON.
Okay.
Then I could come in here and say .NET new solution even, because and let's see, .NET new solution. I don't remember what the different features are. You absolutely, nobody says you have to create a solution.
Right.
But even if you're going the VS Code route and want to use it in Linux and Mac, and you may not necessarily, or maybe you just don't want to use Visual Studio IDE, which has really rich support for solutions, having a solution can help you in VS Code because it groups the projects together, which is still very helpful.
Yeah.
So I create a new solution. I didn't name it. So it just went ahead and said, well, you're in the .NET 6 folder. Maybe you want it to be called .NET 6 SLN. And then I could even go from here and here's where I got to remember. I think what you do is you say new, and I could say Blazor server because that was one of the templates. And let's call it .NET 6 server.web. And what it should do is make a subfolder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you like that? Did I need to tell you more, or did you, or is it just that you don't like that it's no? Why don't we look at the help? You could be right that it's just been a while, right? So let's see. I said .NET new list. What I really wanted was .NET new help. And .NET new name, maybe.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Was -n
Yeah.
for the name.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you were right. So let's try that.
Well, not there.
Oh, what did I do wrong here?
If you go back a little bit more.
I want to call it Blazor server, but the name of it was going to be .NET.server.web.
Yeah.
.NET 6, because the solution is .NET 6. I'm using Blazor server, and I want to say this is the web project, which again, I just came up with that naming. Don't think that I thought really hard about that naming convention. So here we are. I can go to that folder now, and there's my CS proj.
Nice.
It's not in the solution though.
No.
So we know that because I can come back out to I can come back out here, and what is our solution called? There it is. It's not in here. So here's where I'm going to have to do some more looking up. I'm pretty sure we're going to see .NET add. It might be .NET SLN add. .NET add command that adds to the project. So now let's go .NET solution and look at its features. There's an add here. So I say .NET solution, and the solution file, it will find the default because I've only got one in here, and that's what they're saying in arguments. If not specified, the command will search for the current one. For a default one. So I don't need to write that, but I do need to say that it's here, and then there's the CS proj.
Yeah.
Add that. And now let's go back and look at this SLN file again. And it's there.
Yeah.
It's
That's
just
cool.
that, SLN files are not as fun, but it's here. And so to your point, if you think you got to have Visual Studio to do all this stuff, you don't. It can all be done by command line.
Mm-hmm.
I love that because I think when you can do things from your console, then now they're very scriptable, automatable. You can write code that consumes these things. You can write code that does little more than builds up a solution. Not that you want to do it this way. You might want to use a template, get a template going, get it registered, use the template process. But, it's nice to be in a world today that we were not all that long ago, where to get anything done, you had to fire up Visual Studio.
Yeah. Yeah. And the cool thing is that what you just did there, if you've got the C# dev kit inside of your VS Code, it'll see that and understand you've got projects there.
Yeah, exactly. It'll work. I can still use it in VS Code. I can still use it in Visual Studio, and that all works fine. Yeah. So I think we've got probably enough time left to file new project. If you think, unless we're missing something before we at least look at that.
No, that seems like a good next step.
Yeah. All right.
We take a few minutes and do that.
Let's take a quick look. So hopefully, like I said, if you've been following along, a little bit of these are maybe topics. What I'm hoping is, are these the topics that, we just kind of gloss over as developers and people who write instructions and documentation or show you how to do things, even here on YouTube, some of the awesome creators, MVPs who say, hey, I'm going to show you how to get started with Blazor. And it's like, for me, sometimes there's the thing before the thing of, okay, that's cool that you started at the ground level with .NET New or Visual Studio File New Project, but I'm having trouble getting there.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating when that happens. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring up the Visual Studio 2022 preview, which is launching on the main monitor. So I've got to bring it over after it comes up. And hold on a second. My dog wants in, so
go for it. I think we need to get Chris a revolving door so that, or maybe it's a doggy door. I don't know. One of those two. Which do you think, Chris? Is it a revolving door we need? Is it a revolving door we need, or we need a doggy door to let him get in and out?
Yeah, there's something. What happens is once school starts, there won't be so much commotion in the house. Which again,
Very
look,
true.
it doesn't matter either way.
I agree. It's just funny to talk about. That's all.
Yeah. It's like every episode. How many times we could have a whole bingo card of how many times this Chris get up. every game. So every time. So we've got some interesting things here. I am very fortunate to have the GitHub Copilot chat preview. So we might play around with that a little bit. And at the same time, I've got a blank solution explorer. Nothing going on here. Nothing up our sleeves. What does it look like to create a Blazor 8 project? In this .NET Preview 8. So if I do nothing more than say file new project, I know that's a little on the small side. Try and zoom in here a little bit.
There we go.
There's a spoiler over on the left, thanks to the recent project templates. I don't remember if we looked at this closely last time, Rich. You may remember. Is that if I just search for Blazor, oops, that's not what I meant to do. If I just search for Blazor and let it update, it should update. Is it too busy? Oh, there it goes. Okay. So what do we get? What do we get in our list? We get the Blazor server app and Blazor WebAssembly app, which we've had for some time.
Yeah.
we have .NET MAUI Blazor hybrid app, which I don't remember if that was the name of the template when we tried out .NET MAUI, but it's essentially using Blazor in a .NET MAUI app. We tried that out, got it working in a phone emulator. I think I even ran it on my phone live. That was pretty fun. But this is the new one, Blazor Web App, a project template for creating a Blazor web app that supports both server-side rendering and client interactivity. So
cool. Yep, that's the new way of doing.
This is what's come. Now, these templates are going to be here in .NET 8. Your apps still work. You can bring them forward to 8, compile them, deploy them. There's nobody saying you have to switch. And we're even going to see that switch is kind of a loaded term as well, because it's not so much switching. It's that these are new features being added to give us server-side rendering. And I was just calling this Blazor 8 while we're kind of doing the exploratory part of this.
Yeah.
Just read an interesting blog post called Throw Your Code Away. It might have been called Throw Your Code Away once. I should really link it in the note. And it talked about how for everything you do, you should start some new project, build a little prototype, and promise yourself you're going to throw it away. Because otherwise, you try to do the thing and get it right the first time. So there are some features here that I don't quite totally. We're going to check a box here, and we're going to try to see if we can figure out what the project does in the next 10 minutes. But we're going to configure for HTTPS. I don't mind doing that. And then use interactive server components, which is basically saying you're enabling the just-in-time updating that we normally associate either with SPAs or with what Blazor WebAssembly did for us, or what Blazor Server did for us with the SignalR connection. I happen to like top-level statements, so I am going to not check the box that says do not use them.
Cool.
I've also come to really like global usings, to the point that I kind of want a hotkey that in Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code that says move all usings to global usings. Just get them out of here. Like I have really come. It's strange how taste comes and goes, and I have come to dislike just the legion of using statements at the top of a file.
Mm-hmm.
So, what does our program CS look like? What's interesting is what will be interesting to do, and maybe we can do next time, is I started comparing this to what it looked like in Blazor 7.
Okay.
Just to see like what's different. And it turns out like you don't see a whole lot at first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes sense, because there was one of the videos that I was watching, and the comment was made is, you got a Blazor 7 app? Go to the project file, change the Blazor, or the version from 7 to 8. It's now a Blazor 8 app.
Yeah.
Right? So you would expect not many of these things to change.
Right. I think it will be interesting to compare the program CSs, and I think we'll do that next time. But the key points here is that add Razor components is what is kind of enabling Blazor, so to speak, because at its heart, Blazor is about building components that are rendered on your web pages, either on the server side or rendered by that Blazor WebAssembly runtime, or being updated by that Blazor server SignalR runtime technique. So these two, this builder component says, this adds services to support rendering interactive server components. This is what lights up the ability to update components, which that's just how everything worked in Blazor previously.
Right.
Everything was technically an interactive component. Even if you were just saying to yourself as a developer, let me take this and put it, even though this is static, let me put it in a component so that I can reuse it over and over and over. Everything was static. And then this is the thing that says, like, this enables rendering all this stuff server side. So other than that, this doesn't look very different at all, except we kind of have this extension method now that maps. It's kind of interesting. You might squint out a little bit and say, oh, that's interesting. This kind of feels like map get or add controllers. And what it's really doing is it's mapping out the components, because in Blazor 8, it's more of a first class thing for components to be referred to by routing. From what I'm beginning to gather is Blazor uses that internally to route
Interesting.
basically answers. And it'll be really interesting to see if we can spot this in the F12 tools. I don't know that we will, not because it's hidden, just because we might not know what we're looking for. So that's the only thing. That's the only thing. It's not because I think anything's being hidden from us.
Right.
It's just that sometimes you got to figure out, what am I looking for again? I'm going to run this real quick so we can see what it does. And then I think we'll have time to just look at one more thing. Is, okay, the app started, but where did you start? Where did you start, app? Oh, here we go. Okay. So welcome to your new app. Counters here. Great. Weather's here. The weather component had a little loading bar. And what this is trying to demonstrate is streaming rendering. It's trying to demonstrate that I rendered this component server side that just said loading. And then on the server side, we went ahead and made our API call, rendered the result, and streamed that down. And then Blazor was smart enough to take that little package of HTML update and just plop it in. What we don't have time to look at is some of you may be squinting a little bit and saying, hold on a second. I was able to do stuff like this in Blazor 7. I was able to say if loading. And in fact, if you do a file new project on Blazor 7, you'll see it. And that may be the first place where you go, I don't understand. Like, I don't see what's different. And I think that what's different is the technical execution on what is actually happening. First of all, we have the new streaming rendering the stream rendering attribute. It's turned on. Your code doesn't change. You're still saying that if forecast is null, then let's put up loading. But if forecast is not null, then let's show the forecast. And the work is being done here on initialized async, where we're quote unquote, we're going out to an API, except we're not in the sample. We are pretending that we are with a 1 second delay. And then what we're really doing is we're creating some random forecasts. That's all. Yeah. We could look at this code in Blazor 7. It will look really similar. And I think it'll make you wonder, hold on a second, I don't understand what's different. So I don't know if this would be interesting to everyone. Let us know in the comments. I had been thinking about us opening up the F12 tooling and seeing if we can spot the difference between stream rendering and the older way where the interactivity was provided directly by, like, if we made a Blazor WebAssembly app, we should notice the different ways that they interact. Like, we wouldn't see HTML coming down. We would just be like, well, looks like Blazor WebAssembly just handled it. It made an API call, or it wouldn't be an API call because it would just be this code embedded. We'd probably see nothing. It would just work. So I'm curious. The other thing I noticed about this, and we don't have time to look at it now, is there is a lot of color in the Razor editor today that I did not see if I go back to Visual Studio 2022 current and open up an app. So I haven't confirmed this yet, but I feel like there are some either options that have been turned on by default for the first time, or maybe are new to really try to pop more in the Razor editor, each of these different keywords and functions and so on, not to mention colorized braces,
Yeah.
which we brought to Visual Studio Code a while ago. I think there was even an episode where I went go looking for how to turn those on.
Mm-hmm.
But if we open this up in Blazor 7, they weren't all colorized. I went like, oh, interesting. So, there's a lot to look at. Yeah. There's a lot to look at for sure. So yeah, a little bit of a whirlwind, but hopefully interesting.
Yeah. And I think our plan is to jump back on tomorrow morning and kind of run through, some of those in a little relaxed pace and kind of drill into those a little bit. I think we both got, I know we definitely got some stand-ups coming at the top of the hour. I've actually got a customer coming in today, so I've got to go greet and do those kind of things a little ahead of that. So
absolutely. So, Rich, thanks for joining us today. Thanks you for what I really meant to say is thank you as always, but thank you online for joining us today. If you're watching right now, don't hesitate to follow the Twitch channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Ask some questions in the comments. We'll get some links into the show notes, and then we're going to be back here tomorrow morning to start working on the website and actually really digging into Blazor in .NET 8. That'll be fun.
That'd be a lot of fun, definitely. Cool.
All right. Hopefully you all had fun, and we will see you next time on the Dev Talk Show.